Shirley Gilbert. I'm Professor of Modern Jewish History at UCL and also a former member of council here at New North London, and I'm really honoured to be able to introduce our esteemed panel to you tonight. So this is the third and final event in the keynote series in which we've looked at three pillars of leadership that resonated very strongly with Rabbi Jonathan as he was reflecting on 40-odd years of leadership here at New North London. And indeed, the series of events is intended to honour Rabbi Jonathan's really inspirational leadership, which we have all been so privileged to benefit from. We've already had very moving and powerful evenings exploring pastoral care and spirituality, and tonight's theme is leading in the public sphere. And I'm really delighted that so many of you have been able to join us today to think about a topic which, at least from where I'm sitting, feels more crucial than ever in the current climate. So let me introduce the speakers who you see alongside Rabbi Jonathan. Firstly, in conversation with Rabbi Jonathan is Jonathan Freedland, who is, I'm sure, well known to many of us as a Guardian columnist and former foreign correspondent. He's the presenter, among many others, of BBC Radio 4's contemporary history series, The Long View, as well as two podcasts, Politics Weekly America for The Guardian, and Unholy alongside the Israeli journalist Yonit Levy. He's a past winner of an Orwell Prize for Journalism. He is also the author of 12 books, the latest being The Escape Artist, The Man Who Broke Out of Auschwitz to Warn the World, and he's also written 9 thrillers, mostly as Sam Bourne, including The Righteous Men, which was a Sunday Times #1 bestseller. Facilitating the conversation between the two Jonathans is Rabbi Jeremy Gordon. Rabbi Jeremy has a degree in law from Cambridge and subsequently went to work in television. His love of Judaism was really ignited at the Limud conference in December 1995. This marked the start of a decade of study in England, Israel, and then New York, where he graduated from JTS. Also, while in New York, Rabbi Jeremy trained as a hospital chaplain and spent many hours working as a chaplain with the Red Cross in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. He's been active in several social action campaigns, particularly relating to refugee issues and international development. And he has served as rabbi at New London Synagogue since 2008. So please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thank you. Just a real privilege. My major claim to fame here is that the very first meeting of what became our Sif Minyan took place in my front room, but that's also a long time ago. Good evening. Just a real privilege to be here. We're going to do 3 things over the course of the time that we have together. I'm going to ask Rabbi Jonathan and Jonathan some slightly more general questions about how they approach this question of engaging both as a Jew in the public sphere. We'll run through some of the hot button issues of our time, and then we'll open up for Q&A. I want to apologise for the lack of diversity on the panel. This is what I believe is referred to as a manel. I don't like them. Rabbi Jonathan doesn't like them. I'm sure this Jonathan doesn't like them. We tried, we failed. Not only are there no women on the panel, there is nobody whose first name doesn't begin with the letter J. And indeed, we have 2 Jonathans. But before we get into all of that, I'm just going to invite my friend and just an inspiration for me on my journey, Jonathan Freedland, just to open up with a couple of thoughts. Jonathan.
Well, thank you. Thanks, and thank you all for being here, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to say, before we plunge into the conversation we're going to have, just a few words about the person who I think has drawn all of us here this evening, and certainly why I'm here. I know that this series honouring Rabbi Wittenberg has got 3 pillars, one pastoral, one spiritual, and one about being in the public square. It fits very much with what I was thinking on my way here, which is I have, over my life, known rabbis who have great academic intelligence. I've known some who have great emotional intelligence. I've known some who have spiritual intelligence. And I've known some who have moral intelligence. And I've even known some who have 2 or 3 of those things. But I only know one who has all 4. And that is a really, really rare combination. In Hollywood, they use the word rabbi to mean sort of mentor or patron, who's the studio boss, who's his rabbi, And in that sense of the word rabbi, I have always thought, since I've known him, of Jonathan Wittenberg as my rabbi, meaning the person I turn to for guidance, inspiration, counsel. And again, I thought about it on the way here, in all 4 of those areas, some moments of real difficulty and sort of pain in my own life, the person I picked up the phone to was Jonathan. In moments of, crisis about the world and politics and all the things we're going to talk about, the person I wanted to talk to was Jonathan. And really above all of those things, I would say, is that 4th category. I would always describe, this is true because I say it behind your back as well, that I consider Jonathan Wittenberg a moral giant. And I don't know if I use that phrase about really anybody else. The lead he sets and has always set on the big moral questions, we're going to come on to this, but paying a price much higher than any other people pay in taking those stances, setting a lead, and managing to do that without ever being moralistic, which is a harder thing than it sounds to pull off, and still being somebody who is, as I said, emotionally intelligent and personally approachable. It's an incredible feat. I don't know anyone else, as I said, who's ever pulled that off. Suddenly realised I've said all those things in front of another rabbi, showing my own lack of emotional intelligence. So, have to dig myself out of that hole.
I think he's a moral giant too. It's okay.
Yeah. So all of those things are true of Jonathan Wittenberg, and that is why it is a huge pleasure, but also exactly your word, Jeremy. It's a privilege to be here this evening. So I just wanted to set out that bit of my story first and foremost.
John, thank you. Let's start going back a long time. Maybe Rabbi Jonathan, you'll respond first to this question. In your formative years, growing up, can you take us back to a moment when you felt that your sense of what it meant to be a Jew in the public sphere was formed? Some moment for you early on in your life.
For the very kind words in my next life, I'll try and live up to some of it. And I just would say to both of you, what friends and what you've been and what guidance you've given and how I've turned to you, often in moments of loneliness and trouble, and you've both been exceptionally kind and thoughtful and supportive, and I treasure that very deeply, and thank you. I can't think of a moment like that. I think that in my early years as a rabbi in the synagogue, I was very, very much immersed in the affairs of the community that's gradually become much more public, really, particularly maybe over the last 10, 12 years. I'm not sure why. I remember we were in our old building, and this probably goes back 25 to 30 years, Jonathan, and I spoke on Rosh Hashanah, and you said to me quietly afterwards, something to the effect that I need to face some of those moral issues. And I've often thought of myself actually as a coward. And over the last period of time, there's been no choice. And I can say more about why I feel there's been no choice. But it's not, it catches up with one, I guess.
Jonathan, would you kindly speak up, because I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. But no, so I was just really appreciating my friends and colleagues, and then saying that I can't think of a time earlier in my life, how this began. I think I was very immersed in community for the first at least 10 to 15 years of being a rabbi, and it's gradually grown on me, partly by being asked to do things for the BBC, first prayer for the day, and then much more recently thought for the day, and writing, but also then feeling there were issues about which I had no choice, that staying silent on them is actually a form of eloquence. And sometimes it's not an acceptable form of eloquence. And I've struggled with feeling a moral coward in all kinds of ways, and felt that there was no choice to speak out on certain issues, and to do so as honestly as I could, with the understanding that I may be wrong. And I think that one of the things I've tried not to do is to create a synagogue where nobody felt they could say something different. Because I think a rabbi sometimes has to take a stand, but that stand should not mean that people are forbidden to disagree. That's really wrong. Yeah.
And Jonathan, to you, a sort of a similar question. How do you feel that your voice, your very unique voice in the public sphere as a Jew, is there a moment or a kind of a formation of how you felt that came together for you?
I think there's no kind of parity here, because I'm a journalist, I was a reporter, and I do my thing, and it's a job that, I'm very lucky to have the job. But even the framing of this, which is, uses the word leading, you both do that. You're leaders of communities. I don't do that. I don't speak for anybody except myself, which is an incredibly, fortunate position to be in. I mean, Jonathan, with characteristic sort of self-criticism and self-interrogation, but to me absurdly suggests moral cowardice. I mean, I don't think that's true. But it's much, much harder. It requires more courage to take a stand if you are in the position that both of you are, where you have a congregation and a community who will not hesitate to leap to their feet and tell you they can't hear you. Who will talk back, and occasionally people might liken the sort of readership you have on a paper to being a sort of community or whatever. It's nothing like the same, and those pressures are just not on me. There are different pressures, which are the awareness that that I am speaking to an audience in Guardian readers that that they don't have a rabbi, and there is no, there are a lot of rabbis who wouldn't be able to talk to that audience, and sometimes I am the only sort of Jewish voice they're getting. I mean, I am aware of that sometimes, but it's a world apart from the pressures of speaking on behalf of a congregation or to a congregation.
I mean, let me give that right back to you, which just to sort of re-articulate. When you feel personally strongly committed to a particular kind of a view, how are you shifted by the fact that when you get up to do that, whether or not you're on the BBC or you're at the Bimmer, you're doing that also as a rabbi of a congregation?
So, do you mind if I take a step back before responding to that, which is, there are two Jewish sources which I kind of think of and weigh in this area. One of them is, and people have heard me say this before, is when Abraham intervenes in the affairs of Sodom and pleads to God if there are 50 righteous people within the city. And the Torah uses the word within, the toch ha'ir, within the city. And the great 20th century biblical commentator, the Chama Leibowitz, said, we know perfectly well what he's talking about. Why within? We know it's Sodom. And she comments, based on an earlier comment by Ibn Ezra, that if you don't dare enter the public square, you just keep what you think is right private, then what use are you to your society around you? You may save your own soul, but that's it. You have to engage within, that is the public square. And that's had quite an impact on me. But the other text, which says something different, is the text in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Elders, which says there are 3 crowns. There's the crown of kingship, which is about political power. There's the crown of priesthood, which is about kind of spiritual leadership in those times. And there's a crown of Torah. And as rabbis, we're engaged with that Torah. And there's a very big difference between talking on the basis of Torah, Jewish values and Jewish history about politics and actually seeking political power. And I think it's an absolutely key line to keep on the right side of. And I think it's extremely important that any expression that enters the public square is deeply rooted in Jewish text and Jewish values.
I'm going to re-ask my question in a second, but is that your response to the thing that rabbis shouldn't do politics? Is that where you get to that point?
Yes, it is. I mean, polis is the Greek word for a city. Politics is the affairs of the city. The Hebrew Bible, from beginning to end, is concerned with the affairs of the community, society, and the city. So the neat division between religion and politics just doesn't work. I think one can create a division between religion and party politics. That really, I think, has to hold. But religion, and particularly Judaism, is concerned with the ethics of the community and the public square, and therefore is intrinsically political.
So let me keep this moving forward, and can I re-put this? How do you ameliorate, alter your own political, religious understanding of what you ought to say by the fact that you have this extraordinary day job?
So I found it just the last period of time has, for reasons everybody will understand, being extraordinarily difficult. And there've been two things which have concerned me. One is this community, like I think all Jewish communities, we have so struggled with the anti-Semitism, the hate for Jews, our passionate connection with Israel, our people. And we're moving on to this. What everyone thinks of the direction of Israel's leadership, it's our people, it's my family, and I'm deeply close to it, and concerned with what is done by Israel as well as what is done to Israel. It's extremely difficult, and one of the issues has been keep the community together. The other has been a sense that I have a moral obligation, and quite a number of people in the community have written to me in very, very strongest terms, are you going to fail to say anything? Are you going to be like those leaders who never spoke out? So, and I felt also an obligation, knowing that I may be mistaken, to do my best to say what I believe to be true and right. And those two are in tension, and the tension can be ameliorated by being careful about how one says what one says. And I will, unless I have a flash of idiocy, which happens quite frequently, I will try and make sure I pass by my words by 2 or 3 people who read it critically before it goes out, which has included present company on several occasions. And I'll try and pass it by someone also who doesn't agree with my views.
You said something about trying to think about what it would be to be attending a shiva in that context. Because I feel that, I think you do as well.
I've tried through my career, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands about how I failed here. I've tried to think, I don't want to be a rabbi about whom people will say, if a tragedy happens, I don't want him in my house. That's been a bottom line. And, I don't think I've succeeded 100%. I've really, really tried. And actually, I don't think people would hold one's politics against one for that. I think they would hold one's behavior against one for that. But that's been my bottom line.
Well, I was just going to say that's such a good illustration of the difference, because I don't ever have to think that. I mean, the idea of if I'm writing a column thinking, if once this is published, will I not be able to, the example you've given is perfect, can't be improved upon, but that constraint on you, that's a real one, which is you can't just sound off in the bimmer because you have to minister to people in their, hours of great need. And so that's why the two things, don't connect. But maybe this is a useful thing, it's that in a strange way, I have found that the thing that is useful is almost a kind of opposite impulse, which is, I think sometimes, if I write this, am I telling people exactly what they want to hear? If so, I'm not writing the right piece. You know, if you're just comforting people and you're in their they're keeping them in their comfort zone, I think it's sort of pointless. So, in my own case, on something like Israel, you know, for 26 years I wrote a column for the Jewish Chronicle, and for more than that I've been writing a column in The Guardian. And I often thought, I would make my life so much easier if all the pieces I wrote in the Jewish Chronicle appeared in The Guardian, and all the pieces I write in The Guardian appeared in the Jewish Chronicle. Everyone there would then love me. Because in The Guardian, I'm always saying, here's the case for why Israel's doing what it does, and I know it looks bad, but actually there's this. And in the Jewish Chronicle, I'm sticking it to the, Israeli government. It would go down a storm in The Guardian. So I could make my life much, much happier, but I almost feel the very reverse, which is, if I'm just giving them the warm balm, then there's no point in it. And I'm always amazed when I see fellow, columnists on either paper, actually, sort of tickling the tummy of their readers. And I just think, well, what is the point of that? So it's almost the reverse impulse of the sort of shiver.
There's a really interesting line. I first heard this line told in the name of Rabbi Joshua Heschel. I know someone who's inspired both of us very, very deeply, who said that the job of the rabbi is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And when I got out to New York, I realized that he borrowed it from Reinhold Niebuhr at the Union Theological Seminary, one of the great Christian theologians of the 20th century, said the job of the priest is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And Reinhold Niebuhr, it now turns out, got it from Joseph Pulitzer, of course, the journalist. So the job of the journalist is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. What's the goal? How do you measure success? Is there a time when you try to engage in the public sphere religiously and you feel that you have had some kind of purchase, right? I mean, the Messiah is not yet here, but what does success look like, or what are you trying to do?
Several times when I finished a marathon, I just burst into tears because I actually know I've done something. This is not an experience I've ever had as a rabbi. You never know what the impact has. I mean, people sometimes say nice things, they probably sometimes want to say less nice things, but they're kind enough not to. I don't actually know. I think that part of the responsibility is to put some of the real challenges into the space where people hear. And sometimes that's towards the Jewish audience, sometimes an area I'm passionate about with climate, it's towards the serious political leadership of our country and beyond, and to put the question there and to try to do it in the most morally compelling and absorbable and acceptable way as one can. Just coming back to what you said about afflicting the comfortable, I also think in these periods of times, sometimes, even though we may be relatively comfortable, we also need comforting. I think one of the big roles also is to try and have words of healing, and not have words that tear wounds apart.
And Jonathan, for you, what is the goal of your kind of professional endeavours when you write as a Jew, when you bring your, I'm thinking more of the Guardian stuff rather than the Jewish Chronicle stuff, as it were.
Well, I'm really struck by what Jonathan said there about writing in such a way, or presenting something in such a way that people will listen. And that is so right, and I realise that is a constant thought about opening people's ears rather than closing them. So, as one example, because I have talked about this in a few places, a word I have just stopped using is Zionist and Zionism, because it is so misunderstood, it is so deliberately misunderstood, it acts as such a barrier. You can just feel people closing their ears when they hear that word, or defaulting to their previous positions, or it's almost sort of donning their suit of armour on either side, It's just not helpful. And so breaking things down in such a way that people can hear them. And so, very often what would I say? You know, I could very, you know, talking in the Guardian about, well, a word that you would often use is, and it's not, you know, we all know that Israel has much more meaning than just this, but as a shorthand, if you talk about Israel as a refuge or a safe haven, a place that at last Jews could be determined, masters of their own future and destiny, people hear that very differently from saying Zionists, you know. They just hear the words and the idea of it. So I'm doing that all the time of how can you make this something that people can hear? But I also think what John said at the end about sometimes people need comforting, that is also true in order for people to listen. And so, you know, now in a way what I was doing on the Jewish Chronicle is now that's been played out much more unholy. This podcast that I do with Yoni Levy from Israel's Channel 12. Luckily, this isn't something I have to think about or do as a sort of move, but it's just true that I think people can hear and take it when I am very critical, as I have been for the last 2 years, about Israel's conduct of the war. They can take that from someone who they think, and in this case, it would be right if they think this, is feeling what they're feeling, and is feeling the anguish of October the 7th, and the hostages, and the day-to-day turmoil we were all going through. I think if you know that the person feels that, and wants this agony to end, then you can hear them then criticising some decision by Netanyahu or Yisrael Katz or whatever. It's completely different from hearing that from somebody who is standing on the outside wagging their finger. You know, you need, in order to hear from somebody that you're on the wrong path, you need to know that they will celebrate your triumphs and grieve your tragedies. And that is something, you know, as I say, it's not like a posture, it's not like a device. But looking back over what I've done, I think that is probably why, even though I know, because believe me, they don't hesitate to tell you, that a lot of people can't stand what I'm saying on the podcast. They don't discount my right to say it. I remember, this is nearly 20 years ago, oddly, Netanyahu was probably Prime Minister then as well. But I wrote something in the Jewish Chronicle about Ilan Ramon, the astronaut,
Yes.
who was killed, and it was just about the tragedy of that, really, and the emotion it struck. That if you're a Jew, the idea of a Jew in space, there's sort of comedy about it, but the idea that an Israeli was able to achieve this ultimate thing. And, you know, that I quoted that line from the brilliant Ronald Reagan speech about the Challenger disaster when he said they touched the face of God. And how tragic it was that he was killed in that space disaster. And the then editor of the Jewish Chronicle said to me afterwards, you know, because you've done that, that's like almost you've put a kind of emotional deposit down with the readers. They're going to take it from you for another 3 or 4 years, everything else you're dishing out, because you felt that pain the way they felt. And like I say, it's not, if it was a gesture people would have seen through it a long time ago, it is what I actually do feel. And so, you know, on Unholy, a while back, I described this bar mitzvah that happened in the shul this is the shul I don't go to. The shul, New Stoke Newington Shul, Sharon Lifshitz, the daughter of the one hostage and one murder victim of Hamas. Her son was bar mitzvahed in our shul. And I will only give very sparing account because I get quite verklempt when I talk about it. It was an incredible occasion. I mean, even her brothers were called up to read from the Torah. Kibbutznikim, they had never set foot in the synagogue. They were standing up at the wrong time, sitting down. They had no idea what was going on. But they were called up by the name, I can't remember the first name, but Ben Oded. And we knew Oded Lifshitz was dead then. And it was just overwhelming. And we sang the prayer for the hostages with Yocheved Lifshitz there. Anyway, my point is, I described that on Unholy, and people could hear in my voice that I was properly moved by it. If then 10 minutes later I'm talking about what I think is a crime to have deprived Palestinians in Gaza of humanitarian aid, people will hear it from me in a way they wouldn't hear it from perhaps some of my colleagues on the newspaper.
So we went to this sort of second chapter, as it were, of our time together. And let's start, and I will be so temerarious as to perhaps interrupt, but we're going to try and get through, hold on to your keyboard, Israel, climate, Ukraine, anti-Semitism and populism. So we have just over half an hour. Jonathan, Rabbi Jonathan, in your engagement with Israel, where are you? What are you trying to do? What have some of these experiences been for you?
It's hard to sum up. I've been to Israel more since October the 7th, rightly so. I would gladly go more as well. And in some respects, I felt more at peace, more at ease, more connected there than the complexities of being here. And almost everybody who's been to Israel has said the same thing to me. That actually, it's having such deep solidarity with so many people I love and know. And beyond and above the politics, this is my people, this is my family. My father's life and his family were saved by Israel, but I don't now have, except for one cousin, have direct, immediate family there. But so many people I care about, and so many people who appreciate the support and the solidarity. And one of the things we've done as a group of rabbis is regularly send gifts and messages to all our Masorti rabbi colleagues for all that they are carrying. And so many people need the solidarity. But at the same time, I've been deeply upset by two things. I've been on the West Bank in Palestinian villages now several times. I've seen with my own eyes, I've heard the testament. I can't pretend it's not happening. It includes killing Palestinian civilians. It includes setting fire to their homes while the children are in there. And I see the Judaism I love and we devote our lives to being used to justify this. And that's appalling. And in terms of the war against Gaza, I never sort of called early on for a ceasefire. I didn't understand how Israel was expected otherwise to respond. But I've been really struck by, and the evidence that I have come from Israeli organizations, breaking the silence, for example, about what's gone on in Gaza, and have spoken about it. But I've tried to be sure that I've spoken about it absolutely clear that, what you said it touches the heart of it, as someone deeply connected to Israel. I've also had a number of thoughts for the day during this period of time, which is really difficult because the second you're on that spot on Radio 4, you're representing everything Jewish and everything Israel. Yeah. And I've tried to find a way of speaking that has not been around the politics, but around the humanity of people. Twice I was given Yom HaAtzmaut as my date for Thought of the Day, without them looking it up. I was quite cross when it happened the second time. But I said that I can't do this, because if I don't speak about Israel, I'm letting my people down, and I won't do that. And if I do speak about Israel, this is not the subject on a British radio program, and it's not going to go well.
Can I just comment? Jonathan, you were just saying that you get away with things because people believe that you're on the inside, and I certainly feel that. What's your experience of, as it were, getting away with it, right? Being someone who the outside world would see as a decent human being with a love for Israel, or within the Jewish world of being someone with a love for Israel, but who is prepared to critique. How do you respond when these sort of, these slings and arrows come across?
Well, certainly received some from both directions. Why have you failed to speak out? I do not use these analogies, I avoid them, but I'll tell you what people have said to me. Are you like those German Christian ministers who said nothing about the Jews? I've been told that. And on the other side, you've got blood on your hands, how dare you, what do you know? So that's how it is. It doesn't take away the obligation to try and say what I think is true to the Judaism as I understand it, bearing in mind that I may be wrong.
I think we've had a piece about Israel, Jonathan. I'm gonna sort of keep skating on this ice. Climate. Jonathan, just an extraordinary love that you have, and an extraordinary leadership, perhaps above any other area. But I guess again the same kind of question. how does the issue of climate inspire you and inform your rabbinic voice and your public-facing voice?
So I just want to appreciate that Abby Levitt, who's the chair of trustees of Eco-Judaism, is here and has done phenomenal work and has actually been at COP. And Eco-Judaism was the only Jewish organisation at COP facing the fact that the word genocide was all over the place, without any reference to anything to do with the environment whatsoever. And you were there with Naomi Werber, and that's courage and appreciate it. I just feel this so deep. It's just an instinct of anguish and fear and worry. I've always loved the natural world. I've seen it change before my eyes, even here in London. The south of East England has become a recognised semi-drought, semi-arid area. It's certainly, that joke about it always rains in England. Well, it doesn't always rain in England. Sometimes when we need it to rain in England, thank you. And I'm very, very worried for the future. And I see an enormous amount of local amazing projects, and I see a failure of senior political leadership to have the courage to take long-term actions which are short-term difficult. And I worry about the built-in short-termism of democratic societies in coping with this issue, and the totalitarian societies are often busy with their own power. And I'm extremely passionately worried about the future. It's not a very nice thing to say, sorry.
Jonathan, you have areas of expertise which is, don't necessarily include this, but how does this question sit with you and move you?
This is one of those areas where absolutely clearly I can point to the influence of Rabbi Jonathan on me. I don't think I understood the centrality of this issue before I listened to you on this subject and saw your kind of lived commitment to it. It's you're right about the expertise point. I have colleagues who are very, very expert on this subject, and I tend to defer to them, and that's not always great because it means I'm not highlighting it. But once or twice a year, and it's not enough, but I will write about it, and I definitely would not have done that had I not listened to and been trained by Jonathan. And I would go for even further. The appreciation of the natural world, I think, was a missing piece in me before I knew you. And I came to see that through Jonathan's eyes, and never sort of stopped doing that. And it is something which I think, again, sets Rabbi Jonathan apart from his, many of his rabbinic colleagues. I mean, you just do not hear that from many others, and it's, but it's absolutely central, surely, to what it is to be human and to be alive. And I think that's one of those areas where, that notion of Jonathan as a sort of, as I said, a moral giant who stands above, many of his colleagues. That is the area where, in some ways, it's most visible.
I think that's right. So maybe, Rabbi Jonathan, I'll give you a second bite of this cherry, pushing the environmental analogies. But you spoke about I'll call it your political read of this situation. But can you connect your Jewish sense and your sort of rabbinic understanding of what you're trying to do as a rabbi?
Yes, because at the heart of the Hebrew Bible, the heart of the Tanakh, is a sense that this is God's world. And that we hear, and we talk about, to work it and keep it, but the word la'avod, avodah, really has the sense of service. We use it for prayer. So it's a reverential attitude towards land. And this is at odds with the culture of entitlement and often unbridled consumerism with which I grew up. I feel very implicated, I'm part of it, in living in a way which is not sustainable and not right. I realize I do that. I'm trying to curb it, but and not just the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, but if you look at the world of the Mishnah and the Talmud, here are communities which are subsistence farmers. They know the meaning of corn. They know the meaning of locusts. They know their local fauna and flora, and they live in close proximity with them. And over the last years in particular, I've come to feel more and more that this great division between human and all other forms of life, the heightened anthropocentrism with which we live, is actually wrong. And that we have a much greater sense of kinship with so much more of life than I've realized. And that's manifesting itself in the way we're finding ourselves dependent on things we thought were mere insects, like bees, for example.
Let's move on, and Jonathan, I'll come to you on. I mean, the word I wrote down is Ukraine, but there's something of that side of the world, and 4 years into this war, how is your Jewish part of yourself? How does that fold into how you respond to what you've seen and in many cases documented on that side of the world?
I mean, it could easily be wrapped up with the Israel conversation, so maybe I will work hard to separate it, but I'm very conscious of writing Jewishly even when I don't make that explicit. And I think in a weird way the readers get that too. So when, straight away in the aftermath of the invasion, I was talking about the kind of world this represented, a world in which one country can be an aggressor and invade the territory of another, and that not being a world we want to live in, because we've been there before, and we've seen, to see in Putin a threat of an aggressor who has imperial ambitions for Europe. You don't have to spell out who it is you've got in mind and what history you're thinking of and why you don't want to be in that world again. And that, I think, is hugely part of what, fuels the writing. I know I can be a bit of a broken record on the subject of Donald Trump. But one of the reasons why is that, and it comes and goes, right now we're in a period where it's more visible than it's been, but Trump has picked a side in that battle between aggressor and victim, and he's picked to side with the aggressor. And that means a different kind of world is appearing before our eyes, in which might is right, and the law of the jungle applies, and whichever country is strongest can just gobble up small countries. And the world after 1945, for about 7 or 8 decades, however imperfectly, was not that world. It was a different, we had restraints and international law, often honoured in the breach, we know that, not perfect. So there is real sort of foreboding, I feel, when looking at this subject, and I just, as I say, I don't think even that I have to spell it out to readers. They know what history I'm sort of carrying on my back when I fear this kind of future.
I mean, you've written on the Holocaust, and you're obviously, you're a Jew. But when you look at what is happening, are you thinking about Chamberlain? Is this, that relationship of appeasement playing out again?
Yes, I mean, that's my worry, that in a way it's almost, I don't want to say it's worse, but it's somehow different because, Chamberlain, the accusation against Chamberlain is that he folded before Russian aggression, that he was weak in the face of it and was trying to placate it. But Donald Trump, it's different. He actively sort of cheers Putin along. He thinks, yes, Putin is trying to remake the world in a way that I quite like. A world of big powers who sit and carve up the world for themselves. And, all restraint, all international bodies, and indeed the allies of the victim, which in this case is the European Union, they're the enemies. I mean, this new national security strategy that just from a few days ago is an extraordinary document, where he says, who's the threat to Western civilization? Well, it's, Belgium, rather than Vladimir Putin's Russia. And so that, I don't think, on the charge sheet against Chamberlain, which is long, there's not the idea that he was somehow benignly approving the Hitler project. He was just caving into it. It's something different.
No, thank you. By the way, spoiler alert, last question from me will be about hope. But before we get there, Rabbi Jonathan, we could do this all day. Your leadership on the issue of Ukraine and your personal investment as a rabbi and as a Jewish leader is, I just want to pay just deep, deep tribute to, and also just a kind of a deep appreciation that I know someone is doing it, and it makes me very, very grateful to be in the relationship of love and affection towards you. But what happened for you, I guess, immediately after that invasion? How were you stirred as a rabbi?
I just want to say, you said, the last question about hope. We need to make sure we don't run out of time for hope. I think it's personal connections. I got a call from Elizabeth Sochenko, who was then working with the CCJ, to say the Ukrainian bishop, Kenneth Nowoskowski, is now feeling suddenly very alone. I think he thought he'd come to an outpost, and then he finds himself in the middle of this world conflict. Please call him. And he came that Shabbat, and he came to shul. It turned out, I didn't know, he'd grown up in Canada with close associations with the Jewish community. People have heard me say this. I asked him to say a few words. We were in the Beit Midrash down there. There were about 30 people there. And he came out to the front and he wept. And he couldn't say anything. And since then, he's spoken here several times. And I've actually spoken in the Ukrainian cathedral at commemorative events of years of the war. There's a real friendship there, but there's also a sense of huge numbers of innocent people who are being killed. David, we spoke yesterday about your mechutans. I don't quite know, it's not quite for your daughter-in-law's grandma. I don't think even Hebrew has a term for that. Who was killed in Kherson. And then I spoke about it with Bishop Kenneth late last night. And he told me a host of stories of people who are simply dying. It's a very clear human story. I wouldn't have thought, and I perhaps wouldn't have thought that as a Jew, one would be praying for Ukraine. Think of the history, and it's complicated. But now I feel that what's happening is it's a war by proxy. Poland is beginning to think, that was yesterday's Guardian, that it's not a war by proxy. It's insisting every new home has a bomb shelter. I felt that invasion of Ukraine was the thing that pushed me to feel we're really not at a world at peace with some wars here and there. We're in a world of war. And that's really changed for me. And it's a very clear human issue.
What's your analysis of how anti-Semitism is playing out? Let's just keep it to this country. At this time.
I love that you're keeping it cheery for us. Look, we all know the numbers are up. It's surged in this period since October 7. The relation between those two events is complex. How that happens exactly, but we know it happens. We obviously have to be vigilant in the face of it, but we also have to, I think, really work hard not to let it define our lives. I know there are people who have to make it their working life, people who work in the CSD, and we're incredibly grateful to them. But in a way, the purpose of that is that let them do that so that we can live our Jewish lives. Because I think there is a danger that this becomes, in a way, this becomes the Jewish life. People who are just obsessively scrolling through social media and, reading the pages of the newspaper that I no longer work for, which every single page is just another episode of anti-Semitism. That becomes their Jewish identity. That's no good. The reason why we have the guardians, small g, the guards standing outside synagogues is so that Jewish life can go on inside the synagogue. Yeah. That's why they're sort of on the outside so that Jewish life can happen on the inside. Let's not get that to live in our heads. I understand why it does, but I think we have to really make a kind of very intentional choice to not let it be the center of our identity. I think over these decades, the Holocaust was very central. I'm as guilty as anyone. I've just written, 2 books on it in 6 years. I know that. Israel had that role. I think anti-Semitism is sort of some people are a candidate now to be the centre of the Jewish identity. It's not right. I think Jewish life has to be at the centre of it.
So, what is your role as a rabbi at a time of rising anti-Semitism? How do you face that?
So I listen to people talk to me from this community. As it's uneven. Some people have not been that deeply affected, and other people have had their lives ruined by it. Really ruined. Have had to leave their jobs, have had to leave their studies. I'm appalled, and actually recently I felt very, very angry about some of what goes on. I also feel there's a cult of kind of the words people use the word Zion. Sometimes there is legitimate criticism of Israel, but it's become a cover for saying things which Jews feel rightly are addressed as Jews, to Jews as Jews. And that makes the surrounding environment really tough for us. I was at the presidents of the councils of Christians and Jews today, and they're very conscious of really working with their clergy about how they use language. And I remember getting off the train in Edinburgh, a city I love, your son is working there. The first thing I saw was, excuse the language, F Israel, kill the IDF. As the first sign I saw, the next meeting was with the provost, and I asked him, please remove that. But I think there's an atmosphere of intimidation, and I think there's two things that's around. One is we need to support people who really are suffering from anti-Semitism, particularly on campus, but also in a number of professions. It depends enormously who you're working with and where you're working. Some people are, in wonderful workplaces where it's not the case, but other people are really facing difficulty. And the other is, I love my Judaism. I'm really proud to be a Jew. I'm not going to be frightened of it. And to deepen our Jewish life. There's a Hasidic comment on the phrase in the Torah when Pharaoh draws near. The Torah says, Ufaro hikriv. Hikriv is not actually, draws near is not the right translation, it's brings near, it's causative. And the comment is, anti-Semites have always brought Jews near to Judaism. I don't really want to rely on it for our identity and the strength of our community. I want us to live our Judaism because of the wonderful faith and community it is. But if people are being brought, I worry about the people who actually are alone with this. But if people are being brought in, they need to encounter a Judaism that's lived and loved.
But before we get too cheery, I want to just ask you one thing that sometimes gets thrown back at me whenever I am critical of Israeli governmental stuff or Otzma Yehudit in the West Bank, that kind of stuff. They think, you, Rabbi, you're giving an opening to the anti-Semites if you go to those places. How do you respond to that?
It seems to me that they've gone through that opening long before I get there. But also, you can also criticize people for failing to tell difficult home truths. I'm careful in what I say in the public arena and always make it clear that I have a love of my Judaism and a profound, deep connection with Israel. But yes, that charge is raised sometimes.
Do you believe it?
No, because I think plenty of people are saying all kinds of appalling things anyway.
Let's keep moving. The next word is sort of populism, and you can take a British version of it, you can take an American version of it. What's happening in the world, and how should we as Jews, how do you as a Jew feel about that movement?
This would be another example, by the way, of where the Jewishness of where I'm writing from, I think, is obvious to readers without necessarily being spelled out. I think, I may be imagining too much, but on the left and on the right, you're seeing, the word populism is really worth defining because I think lots of people use it even if they don't know what it is. It's simply an assertion that there is the people, the actual people, the real Americans or whatever, who are being thwarted in their ambitions and in their welfare by a small, narrow often secretive minority or elite. And Netanyahu is a populist because he says it's the deep state, it's the universities and the media and the top brass of the military who are, conspiring against the rest of us. But Trump is a populist, and he says it's the judges and universities as well. Zach Polanski is a populist, and Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, it's the 1%. The trouble I have with all of these forms of populism, among other things, is that if you're constantly telling people that they are being frustrated, they would live a better life if only it weren't for this small, narrow, secretive group of people, people are going to eventually say, well, who is this small, secretive, narrow group of people who are somehow, standing between us and a good society? And then all too quickly comes the answer, well, you know who they are. And that's why, that is something I think I've come to understand much better in the last 10 years, about how anti-Semitism it doesn't just sit alongside conspiracy theory, it is the ultimate conspiracy theory. And so if you have, populism is kind of a conspiracy theory, and if you have that view, then it's just sitting there, ready and primed, anti-Semitism, to be an answer to this very shallow question, which is to imagine that the world can be understood as the people versus this small group. So that's why when I shuddered when that Daily Mail front page had those 3 pictures of the judges and it said enemies of the people, when I shuddered when I read that, it was a Jewish shudder, because it's that way of thinking. It doesn't matter whether the judges on the front page of the Daily Mail were Jewish or not, I don't know if they were. It's the thinking, which is that there is a small group of people. That's always going to be bad news for us, left or right.
So I'm the child of refugees from Nazi Germany, and wir Worte populists, Hitler. So not that every populist should fit that category, but I'm immediately anxious about it. And I'm also concerned with the way, as Jews, we can be drawn into seeking the apparent security of populist voices. One of the things about being Jewish, I think, is that we have an intuitive understanding of the multiplicities of identity. We are Jewish. We have affiliations with Israel. Many of us in this room are British, some perhaps a lot. I'm Scottish. My parents are European. And the understanding that identity is complex and the politics of identity, simplifying it down to one thing in order to exclude others, seems to me to go against what Jewish historical experience speaks of so profoundly, and what the Torah speaks of about the dignity of the image of God in every human being. And as you say, the core myth of anti-Semitism is really the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and it's alive and well. So I'm very, very nervous about populism. I'm worried whether any notion of the Jewish embrace of populism, and I think we have a natural affinity with people on the margins.
I'm going to come to Jonathan Freedland in a second, but I want to answer your question as a congregational rabbi. I'm not just a normal congregational rabbi, but there are many people who have helped build this synagogue into the extraordinary place it is. And I'm not suggesting you are at all alone in doing this, but you are absolutely pivotal. And New North London is a beacon community, partly because of its size. And politics requires people. I'm thinking of a definition of a posek. A posek is somebody who Jews follow when they say something. If you don't have numbers, if you don't have people turning out, you're just whistling into the wind. So how do you try and be popular as a rabbi when you're nervous of popularism?
I don't think one tries to be popular as a rabbi. And I think ultimately, the ultimate accountability is before God. It's not even, one's accountable before every person, every life one encounters, but the ultimate accountability is before God.
Amen. John.
Well, I'm so okay with that. I think that's brilliant. That last point, we could sort of. I was just going to make a small point because in my list I mentioned it's left and right. I mentioned Polanski and Jeremy Corbyn. You know, the big screaming obvious example of a populist happening right now is Nigel Farage. And I didn't want to make a wholly, partisan political point, but since I'm the non-rabbi here, I'm allowed to. And just on terms of the Jewish community, right now, it's going on right now, where these revelations are emerging about Nigel Farage. I know a lot of people want to say, look, he was a child, doesn't matter. Just listen to what he's saying now, right now, which is, if what happened, it was banter in the playground. This is describing somebody going up to Jewish peoples and saying, Hitler was right, gas the Jews, and making the hissing sound of gas. Obviously, the right answer would have been, if that happened, that was atrocious and has no place, etc. He has never said that. He says it's banter in the playground. And then just a few days ago, his deputy leader, Richard Tice, said that the people making this accusation are liars who have a political axe to grind. Despite that, the official Jewish communal organisations have not said a word in condemnation of Nigel Farage. And I think they've not done it because they think he might be Prime Minister and they're frightened. And that is not a good place to be. You know, this kind of thinking poses a danger to the wider society. Right now he has other minorities in his sights, not us. Nevertheless, this poses a danger to the society itself that we're a part of. And I do find the fact that the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Leadership Council, the Office of the Chief Rabbi have been entirely mute through this. This has gone on nearly a month. They have nothing to say. You know, we obviously know they would have had plenty to say if this had been the leader of another political party a few years ago. Suddenly they find themselves tongue-tied. These things that we've been talking about tonight, some of them have been historical or perhaps seemingly philosophical or abstract. This is happening right now. And it's a very good example of the kind of, I would say cowardice, certainly timidity, that I think was rightly condemned earlier.
The people were to rewrite, has to remodel. Rewrite his famous words, they came for the Muslims and I said nothing because I wasn't a Muslim. He's not a friend.
I think there's an even more complex piece. Which is the last person who left membership of New London Synagogue for political reasons, left because he's a supporter of reform. And couldn't stand me because I radiated too much anti-reformness. So there's a good question for internally into the Jewish community, particularly I think within, I'm not blanketing the entire United Synagogue, but points right. Okay, we don't have long. If you wish to give a sermon, I encourage you to apply for the position of rabbi of this synagogue. It might be a little late for this. We're going to take, I think, 3 questions, which can be addressed to either of our 2 Jonathans, and then I'm going to give both Jonathans a chance to respond. Does anybody have another mic, or is this the magic mic? Do I have a runner?
I wondered if you could say how you gain moral authority and how you would lose it.
Great question. I reckon it's easier to lose it than gain it. It takes less time. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's very much connected with what you said, Jonathan, about people knowing that there's a love and connection from which what one is saying is coming. And if people don't feel, I really care about you, and I try to listen to you, and what I'm saying comes from that, then you don't have that authority. And I often think, sorry, quick with this one, I often think that people think sermons are a monologue. They really aren't. Sermons are the fruit of listening to your congregation and responding. And I think that's where the authority comes from, the community that gives it to you.
Yeah, one is a shliach tzibur, right? One is sent by the community. Jonathan, where do you find moral clarity and how could you lose it?
Well, I think the question mentioned moral authority, and I think, I wasn't going to claim to have that. I mean, I think, rabbis have that. I'm not sure I have that. I think where you can have some claim for it in just the area of journalism, one important thing is to correct things when you get them wrong.
Yeah.
And it's such an important thing in the sort of post-truth world. occasionally I do talks to school students about how can they tell what's fake news and what's not real, and what's real. And the test is, does this newspaper or news organisation correct itself when it gets something wrong? Does it admit it made a mistake? And I think that's such a good lesson. More generally, you can trust somebody who funnily enough, who admits error. And or people you don't trust are those who don't. So I think I think that applies. You know, the BBC have a corrections column, the Guardian does, the New York Times does. You know, there are others that do not.
Get your repentance in early. Thank you for having.
And of course, the world now is a very, very noisy place when you do something which is unpopular before you hear about it. So I just wondered whether both of you would like to share with us an experience maybe, or how you feel about when you know actually that you've been unpopular because you've heard the reaction, and how personally you handle that.
Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I know, how to respond to that. One of the feelings I often have after giving a sermon when I'm walking back to my place is, who might I inadvertently have hurt? It's a very, and actually, as a rabbi, one does have the permission to apologize. I was talking to a senior politician who said, in my career, I can apologize once per career, maybe twice, but then you're finished. It's a culture where you can't apologize. And I think if I've hurt somebody, that's not saying something I really believe in, which is unpopular. If I've gone and said something hurtful, at least I can apologize. I have that opportunity. And I have in my career. In terms of saying things which are not popular, sometimes it has made me, what have I not listened to? Have I got this wrong? Over things I've said about Israel, I've had, for months afterwards, I've woken in the middle of the night worrying. In both directions about it. And I think difficult things grate on one's conscience in a very painful way.
Thank you. Just listening to a question about popularism, I was struck by something that I know about you, and I've read you in both names, as it were. And in one of your names, well, actually in both of your names, you're a best-selling author. But I mean, you write fiction presumably just to sell more copies, right? And when you're writing columns, you're trying to do something else. Are you aware of trying to be popular and trying not to be popular? How do you swap your key columns?
That's funny, I hadn't thought about that. You're quite right, the fiction was written under a pseudonym because my agent said that my name sounded like a pointy-headed columnist for a pointy-headed newspaper. And too many syllables in Jonathan Freedland and th and fr. So we got rid of that. But you're right, you're right, with something like fiction, you're trying to make it, that was for a sort of mass audience, and so you're trying to make it accessible and exciting and all that. And with columns, it's a different discipline, but you certainly know when it's unpopular and when it hasn't worked, and that is, you can suddenly see on social media there's all these replies piling up, and then people don't pile up in huge numbers to say that was great. So when you see that there's a lot of, and I have really weaned myself off social media. And since 2019, I had a horrible episode on Twitter, and I've since then really stepped back from it massively, and it's only been a good thing because it means they're not in your head. And Barry Weiss, who's now head of CBS and founded Free Press, said when she left the New York Times that Twitter is the editor of the New York Times now. And I really know what she meant. It gets into people's heads. You're thinking of the reaction before you even write the sentence, and you're qualifying and all that. And so I don't do that now, and I think it does mean you are more honest because you're not sort of second-guessing yourself. But somehow you do find, you do somehow manage to find out. And if you haven't seen it on social media yourself, one's friends have a very generous way of pointing out to you and saying, "Oh, you've been really monster." Thank you. It's great, really great.
I'm going to come to two last things. I'm going to save the last one, but as I was thinking about this, I was thinking of a conversation between Oprah Winfrey and Tallahassee Coates. So I'm going to not that I'm playing the role of Oprah Winfrey, but Oprah Winfrey said to Ta-Nehisi Coates, who had published a book documenting the disasters of contemporary society, "Can you give me some hope?" And Ta-Nehisi Coates said, I'm a journalist. It's not my job. Is hope your job?
Such a good question, and a very good one in terms of The Guardian, because actually there was this period where that actually was seen to be, that's what we've got to do, solutions journalism, and there was a whole promotional campaign around the word hope. But actually what's really interesting is we see the data and we see what pieces readers read, and the hopeful ones bombed, and the ones that are, oh my God, the whole thing is, the world's going off a cliff, they're the ones that get the big numbers. So it's, I don't know whether it's the job or not. I'll leave it there because that was the question. So I've got a thought.
Unfortunately, he could have said, I'm not a rabbi, it's not my job. So, as we bring this event towards a close, when you're trying to give hope, when you're touching those parts within yourself that are hopeful and optimistic, what's there?
So I think it is my job, and I'm not always good at it. And I remember during lockdown, a couple of people came to me and said, "Can you write more upbeat pieces on your Friday, please?" And they were right. And that thought has stayed with me. And Hatikva, after all, it's our anthem. It's a really difficult world, and I don't think hope is about denial or illusion. But hope lies in the fact that Judaism teaches we're made in the image of God with the capacity to make choices. We're given a heart that's sensitive, a soul that's responsive, a conscience that knows right from wrong, and the ability to act. And empowering people, encouraging people to do what is right and what is good in whatever sphere of influence they have, that is the basis of active hope, and that certainly is part of the rabbinic role.
When we were talking just before, I said to Jonathan Freedland, do you want to say something nice about Rabbi Jonathan, either at the beginning or the end? If you go at the beginning, I'll go at the end. And you are not only the rabbi of New North London Synagogue, you're also the senior rabbi of Masorti Judaism. Long may you continue to be an extraordinary senior rabbi, not only to Masorti Judaism, but also to me. But I want to just share something of the depth of my debt to you as a congregational rabbi. For that time is shortly coming to a pause. When I started thinking about being a rabbi, it felt like the most ridiculous thing I could possibly do with my life. And some people are laughing. Some of you give me that eye climb. And I came to talk with you. And I remember sitting with you in your old house in your old garden. And I remember you being honest. And it kind of threw me. I remember you being a human being. And it kind of struck me that that's part of the job too. And as I've been on my journey, I've come back to have conversations with you in many gardens and across many fields with many dogs. And you are an extraordinary congregational rabbi. And when I think of Jonathan, I can't put it better than you did, just the way that you just don't, you have triple threats, right? It's the theatric way. But the way that you are able to combine so many different, such diametrically opposed parts of this extraordinary job. And I guess the piece that I was reflecting on today, and Jonathan, you helped articulate some of it, and Rabbi Jonathan, I heard it from you as well. The thing that I felt is that your ability to be a successful person in the public sphere is actually driven by this, by your day-to-day encounters with the lived experience of these extraordinarily fortunate congregants, led so quite brilliantly. You are an extraordinary inspiration to me, and I'm enormously grateful to call you my rabbi, even though I have never paid any money to. No, of course. Let's do this sort of very nicely, but to both our amazing panelists for sharing just so thoughtfully and with an added little extra hurrah for Rabbi Jonathan on this really important time of year.
I just want to say I know that I owe everything to this congregation, to you, to my colleagues, and to my family. But in terms of a rabbi, I owe everything to what this congregation has given me and drawn out of me.
Rabbi Jeremy has stolen my thunder because I was asked to give a vote of thanks. And first of all, I'd like to thank Rabbi Jeremy for facilitating and also Jonathan Freedland and our dear Rabbi for what was a wonderful, erudite and perceptive discussion. I feel, like all of you, that over the decades we've been spoilt. This is something we've come to expect and to come to appreciate. And I think my overwhelming feeling is of sadness that this is the end of an era. I do hope and I trust that Rabbi Jonathan, you will be coming back to speak to us and to expound your wisdom over many, many years. But I would like to say on behalf of all of us and the congregation, the most heartfelt thanks and appreciation.